Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. This is Orphanlast, and today I'm going to go ahead and give you guys a little bit of a speed painting that explains some of what I'm doing, how to draw with graphics tablet, and a little bit about anatomy and foreshortening. So right now I'm drawing basically a chicken scratch or a thumbnail, basically a really small scaled down version of the drawing. And of course, you know, it's small so that I can just with a few strokes of my stylus I can quickly draw something. It's not supposed to be a finished stylized image. It's just supposed to have the character or the scene or whatever it is on the page as a reference throughout the process of you drawing. Now, it's a heck of a lot easier drawing your whole scene on a tiny thumbnail than it is on a gigantic canvas. Now, notice how I lower the opacity on my blown up thumbnail image, and then I go ahead and turn off the blue channel, and then I press OK. Now, if you press the X to close down the window, it's not going to do anything. Make sure you press OK, and it'll keep that layer blue. And this helps it so that when you go back to your sketch, your next layer, for the next layer of complexity and refinement, you can see a distinct difference from the lines that you have drawn compared to the lines that you are currently drawing. Just lowering the opacity doesn't cut it, because just a lower opacity line could very easily be a line that you drew while pressing lightly on the stylus. So just lowering the opacity doesn't cut it. It really doesn't. Now, pretty soon here I'm going to get into drawing the human ear really quick here. Here's something really simple for how to draw the human ear. Okay, now notice how on the bottom of the ear there's like this dangly lobe, okay? And there's right there I just kind of drew this kind of like a profile view of a cartoon character. See, there's this Y there. There's typically a Y shape inside of the ear. So here's the profile view, like this little cartoon character's profile view, right where his nose is, the tip of his nose and such like that, and that is where the hole is that leads into your eardrum. Okay, so that's what you need to consider there while drawing the human ear. Something really basic, a really basic formula on how to draw the human ear. Okay. So, hairstyles. This is really easy. Go to a barber shop, take pictures of hairstyles you like inside of the books that they have there, and just draw from them as a reference, and see if you can draw them from variously different angles. Now, this next little section here is going to be really important here. Notice how the pectorials blend into the deltoid. Okay, now the deltoid is basically the muscle that's attached to your shoulder. Notice how there's like this consistent line that goes from the deltoid to the pectoral, the bottom of the pectorials, and it forms like this W shape around the pectorials and everything like that. And so you can see that, right? What I'm drawing right there, you can see that it's like this continuous line, this waving line that basically forms into a W shape, and the deltoid usually comes to a spiky point. Now, you don't necessarily have to draw it to any sort of exaggerated point, but you want to get the shape there. It's like this. It's almost like a heart shape. The deltoid. It's almost like a heart-shaped object. Now, notice how with the foot, like I didn't want to get stuck drawing the foot and redrawing it, and so it's really like I didn't even keep in mind any sort of, you know, vanishing point or anything like that. I just quickly drew a geometric shape, and then I drew the foot, and that helped me as a template in order to draw it. Now, I wanted foreshortening, and I knew that things weren't looking right, so I went ahead and selected the legs, moved them up, and obstructed your full view of his hips and everything like that with the rest of his body because of foreshortening. And since we're looking down on this character, you know, I kind of made it so his foot was a little less visible, more underneath him. Not only that, but notice how I drew the shoulders, how you're actually looking down on the shoulders. You see more of the trapezius that wraps around the top and into the collarbone, the clavicle, basically. You can see that. In fact, there's at one point where I believe I drew the scapula, which is also attached to the deltoid. Okay, and the scapula is also in some way attached to the scapula is also attached to the clavicle, the collarbone as well. So, and it's those two bones specifically that hold your arm in place to your torso. Okay. And so if it wasn't for those two bones being attached, if you were to dangle off a roof and you're just holding on with that arm that has your clavicle disconnected from your scapula, what would happen is your arm would pop out of place. I don't know necessarily if you would necessarily have no more control in your arm. I think you would have so much pain that you would wind up letting go. And a lot of football players suffer from that sort of injury, and there's not really much that a surgeon can really do about it at all. They can go ahead and make an incision and just kind of like staple it back into place, but really it doesn't really do that much. As you can see, I went ahead and decided to use that layer that I was just working on as another sketch layer, and then I go ahead and select a inking brush. Okay, and here I'm making a lot more refinements and just kind of finalizing the image quite a bit. There's a lot that's still kind of in the shading, I guess, portion. Like a lot of the things haven't been really refined, and that's fine. You know, as long as I'm confident that I have everything that I need in order to finish the image, I can go ahead and proceed with the actual final inking process. Okay, and here I'm making a bunch of decisions. Okay, how much with this view am I able to see? You can see that I included his left nostril, our right. Okay, to our right you can see his other nostril a little bit. Here I had difficulty with his left eye. To us it's his right eye from our perspective. His eye kept looking like this demonic looking thing, and some of it was his eyebrows, some of it was just how I was drawing the eye a little bit. Eventually I refined it and made it look pretty good, but unfortunately, unfortunately it just took a lot of time. Now here I'm looking at my final inking stage, and I can see I don't really like the placement of the hair on my sketch layer. So I went ahead and selected the sketch layer, selected the section, and then moved it so that everything would look really nice. And I also kind of transformed it a little bit, but there you have it. Now, one of the questions that a lot of people have is, how do you draw hair? Well, you start with a thumbnail, you go into a sketch, and then you refine it with your inking process. You have 3 different tries to get your hair right. Okay, so by the time that you're ready to actually ink it, it should be ready to be inked. Now notice how I'm not just tracing on my sketch layer. I'm treating my sketch layer as a sketch. It's not I mean, it is a little bit of a guideline, a little bit, but it's not gospel. There are times when your sketch will throw you off. Now here I'm drawing kind of like the portion of his hairdo that's kind of like a buzz cut. Now basically the way that you do that is you just kind of like do little pock marks with your stylus, but what I notice is that the stylus, when you do that, it oftentimes leaves a result that you don't like, that's not predictable if you're used to using a pencil and paper. Just if you get something that's unpredictable, just go ahead and flip your stylus over to the eraser and then just kind of tap it around and do these little pock marks with the eraser, and it'll look just right. Okay, so here okay, yeah, so here I decided, okay, he's not going to be a nude figure. I'm going to go ahead and include a belt, and I even added the little functionality right there to the belt where, okay, this is how he cinches it down and everything like that. Unfortunately, this video doesn't include the entire drawing process. I'm not really quite sure what happened, to be honest, but it includes the majority of the drawing process. I'm thinking I'm going to try 2 different techniques on coloring this image. One is going to be a cell shading, and one of it's going to be kind of more of a grayscale sort of painting process. I've never done the grayscale painting process, but it's something that I've always wanted to actually do. Now here I wound up making my brush a little bit bigger and everything like that, so that I could kind of just make it look right, just make my line thickness a little bit bigger. Now, one thing that you need to keep in mind is when you do and when you do not want to have a lot of line variance in the thickness of your lines. If it's a portrait sort of picture, then have at it. You can have as much line variance and line weight thicknesses and such like that as you want. And right there you can see that's the scapula. I believe it's the scapula, at least, right there. I drew it there because it looks nice. I don't necessarily know if you'd necessarily be able to see it from this angle, but I believe you would. But anyways, like line thickness, yeah, that's what we were talking about. If you are drawing just a single drawing, okay, like a portrait, or just like one picture, that one picture tells the whole story, and that's it. You're going to print out that picture and hang it on your wall or something like that. You can have a lot of line variance. If you're using it on animation, however, it's usually not advisable, because like trying to keep your lines varying from thick to thin, having a lot of that going on all the time makes it very difficult to keep consistent. So a lot of times you'll see animation where the lines are dancing around and stuff around the characters, like Ed, Edd and Eddy, if you ever saw that cartoon. Now notice here, I'm not following my sketch layer 100% as if it's gospel. I'm just using it when it's helpful, and when it's not, I do my own thing. I'm not tracing, I'm just making decisions. But anyways, the only exception for animation when you can get away with something like a lot of line variance and a lot of like using even gradients and stuff like that is if you're working with like something like a cutout animation rig, okay? And but the thing is, like, if you plan on doing anything really crazy where that cutout animation rig suddenly transforms into being traditional animation and such like that, things are going to start looking weird. So as long as the rig is on the camera, that's fine. But like, if you're going to start doing traditional animation suddenly, it's best if you like have the camera focus on something else for a little bit, for like 30 seconds, and then transferring right back to your character that's now no longer a cutout animation, but as traditional animation, so that there's never any jolting difference, some jolting change to the way that your character is animated. Now notice that there's that little bump there. I drew a lat, okay? The lats are muscles underneath the scapula, okay? And the lat basically kind of wraps around and to the front of your body a little bit, and it ends pretty much right where your armpit is. And so you need to keep in mind that as you move up the torso underneath the armpits, you include just this little bump, especially if you're viewing the character from the somewhat of a frontal view. And you can see right there, I drew it again, and I experiment with it and then got rid of it. Okay, so one thing about anatomy, it's really tempting to learn anatomy, learn all the bones and all the muscles and such like that, and I recommend you learn every major muscle and every major bone, not every single one, because like a lot of times what people do is, oh yeah, I know all these muscles and bones, even the really tiny ones, and so they start drawing all this stuff that doesn't help them. A lot of times what people do is when they learn anatomy, they draw every single muscle on their character, and it winds up looking like the character has no skin, and that looks really bad. Now, how do you give your character skin? Well, you draw out the muscles and then you erase a good portion of the muscles, okay? Now here I still wasn't happy with my pectoral and my deltoid, and so one way to get muscles to mesh together really well is to get them to kind of squish against each other and take up each other's space a little bit. Anyways, that pretty much concludes it for this video. Please like, share, and subscribe, and have a great day.